Good evening, welcome to Novara Live. Coming up tonight, the US and Israel have resumed strikes on Iran and Lebanon, respectively. Reform's Makerfield candidate is under scrutiny over some eyebrow-raising past tweets, but when should politicians be forgiven for their digital footprint? And as a heat wave hits the UK, we dig into the latest research on climate change. I'm Iran Bastani, and I'm joined tonight by Paul Holden. Paul, how are you?
I'm very good, thanks for having me.
Just for people who are maybe not familiar with the noise overhead, we are not being circled by drones, Iranian or otherwise. We are, in fact, in the same room as a great deal of air conditioning. My apologies if tonight's show is a little noisy. It's a sauna in here, basically, at Novara Live Studios. All the fans are going, all the aircon's going. It's not the most expensive kit, so it's rather noisy. We will try to repair the audio as best we can in post, but I've been instructed by Alex to tell you, if you want to help us buy proper aircon, any chance, right? Head to novara.com/support. I've been into the BBC and Sky and GB News studios. It's silent. And that's what we want because the weather isn't going to get any cooler. That's our final story tonight about climate change and the Delulu people still denying its reality. Let's go to our first story tonight. The US has resumed its illegal war on Iran, bombing sites and ships in southern Iran and around the Strait of Hormuz. It means the end of the delicate ceasefire that's more or less held for the last 7 weeks. And the return to instability was immediately reflected in the oil market. The price of Brent crude hit $100 a barrel following the US aggression, leading to fears that a lasting peace agreement between the two countries is now out of reach, and causing one analyst to describe the energy market as having passed the point of no return. $100 a barrel is, of course, a long way off the $126 that Brent crude hit at the end of April. Despite the ongoing blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, prices had fallen in recent weeks as the US and Iran appeared to make progress towards a permanent peace. They fell even further over the weekend after both Iran and Washington signaled that a deal was close. That deal may now be off the table, leading one analyst to tell The Guardian this. It just seems to be this endless loop of Charlie Brown and Lucy with the football. Every single time it's, oh, this time is the breakthrough. This time the energy will flow. And at any one given time it could be right, but so far, repeatedly, it hasn't been. It's worth pointing out that many countries, have not yet felt the impact of the tightening of the oil supply from the Gulf, where exports have fallen from, remember this is really important by the way, 20 million barrels of oil a day to around 5 million barrels. Those shortages have been partly offset by record-breaking uses of emergency oil stockpiles at a rate of some 2 million barrels a day, but those resources will peter out by July, and stockpiles are now critically low. This is the biggest oil shock in history. I know it doesn't feel like it, yet. That's the important word, yet. So, from the perspective of the global economy, the Trump administration's latest assault couldn't come at a worse time. So why exactly did Washington carry out the attacks? The story they're spinning is a familiar one. In a statement, US Central Command said this. US forces conducted self-defense strikes in southern Iran today to protect our troops from threats posed by Iranian forces. Targets included missile launch sites and Iranian boats attempting to emplace mines. US Central Command continues to defend our forces while using restraint during the ongoing ceasefire. Some ceasefire, when you have one side allegedly mining a strait of water and the other side blowing them up, or at least trying to. The Pentagon has not yet elaborated on what specific threats were posed by Iran that required that, quote, preemptive strike. And the US has, of course, tried to use self-defense as justification to bomb Iran from the very beginning of this whole farrago, providing no evidence of any threat prior to its and Israel's ruthless assault on the country in late February. That led to the killing of several senior Iranian military, political, scientific, and religious figures, including then Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, the supreme leader of Iran, no less, as well as the murder of more than 100 schoolgirls when a school was hit by an American missile in Minab. In response to the latest US attack, Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps said this. The United States committed a gross violation of the ceasefire in the Hormuzgan region in the past 48 hours. Iran holds the US regime responsible for all the consequences resulting from these aggressive and unjustified actions. Without a doubt, the Islamic Republic of Iran will not leave any evil unanswered and will not hesitate to defend the Iranian nation. Not empty words. We know that, of course, having seen all this play out over the last several months. The US attack came just hours after a ceasefire appeared in sight, meaning it could be an attempt, of course, by Washington to gain concessions, that 5D chess we always hear when it comes to Donald Trump. On Monday afternoon, US President Donald Trump posted a lengthy update on social media saying this: negotiations with the Islamic Republic of Iran are proceeding nicely. It will likely be a great deal for all or no deal at all. Back to the battlefront and shooting, but bigger and stronger than ever before, and nobody wants that. Nobody maybe except Benjamin Netanyahu. In that post, Trump also appeared to make peace with Iran conditional on a number of Muslim-majority countries signing the Abraham Accords. Those are, of course, the diplomatic treaties drawn up by the previous Trump administration, Trump 1.0, which normalize relations between the signatory country and Israel. So far, only 4 countries have signed up to those accords: Bahrain, Morocco, the UAE, and Sudan. But in his post, Trump said this: after all the work done by the US to try and pull this very complex puzzle together, it should be mandatory that all of these countries, at a minimum, simultaneously sign on to the Abraham Accords. Those countries discussed are Saudi Arabia, the UAE, already a member, Qatar, Pakistan, Turkey, Egypt, Jordan, and Bahrain, already a member. It should start with the immediate signing by Saudi Arabia and Qatar, and everybody else should follow suit. If they don't, they should not be part of this deal in that it shows bad intention. In speaking to numerous of the great leaders mentioned above, they would be honoured as soon as our document is signed to have the Islamic Republic of Iran as part of the Abraham Accords. Wow! Now that would be something special. This is completely insane, not least because Iran isn't going to sign the Abraham Accords. Its political regime, the government, the state of Iran, the Islamic Republic, whatever you want to call it, is not going to recognize Israel, least of all after what it's committed since 2023. But I find it really interesting, Paul. Saudi Arabia has pledged hundreds of billions of dollars in investment to AI, US big tech, arms sales, etc. And even then, that's not enough for the Trump White House if they don't sign a piece of paper that basically gives full diplomatic recognition to Israel, which, of course, is something that Tel Aviv has sought for a very long time.
I mean, it is totally mad. It's totally insane. It's never, ever, ever going to happen that you're going to have all of those different countries signing the Abraham Accords. This is not even thinkable in the realm of what's conceivable, and it's never been conceivable. And what it strikes me as is it's so crazy you don't even know how to attack it. There's so many elements of it that are crazy. For me, the one thing that's really interesting is the extent to which it shows like a total lack of self-awareness about how fundamentally his attack on Iran has actually changed the strategic situation in the whole of the Middle East. Because it was plausible, it was vaguely plausible, maybe back in the late stages of his first presidency, that you could maybe see like a slow squeezing of more states joining the Abraham Accords. But what these attacks have basically shown is that Iran is incredibly resilient to 2 nuclear powers attacking it. They've shown their incredible power to actually project force across the region. None of those partners are going to think to themselves, well, first of all, the US is actually an arbiter of our safety, because when push comes to shove, they haven't really been able to protect the region from Iran responding. And none of them are going to think that Israel is going to be a security partner they can rely on, because throughout this entire process, Israel's done everything it can to undermine the peace process. So you're going to make this happen, you suddenly have to have a situation where all those states suddenly come to think of America, which has behaved in a very fundamentally irrational way in this war, to start behaving rationally and start protecting Middle Eastern interests. At the same time, they must also accept that Israel, which has behaved irrationally with a huge amount of aggression in this period of time, could also be relied on as a security partner. It's just unthinkable. And it makes me think, like, what are we dealing with here in terms of Trump? Like, my least favorite form of article on the internet, which has been happening since 2016, has been people saying, these are the signs that, Trump is experiencing cognitive decline. He's got the mark on his left arm and he's getting some iron, like multivitamin. This post it's finally convinced me that this guy is like actually deranged.
Israel and the US starts a preemptive war on Iran so that Saudi Arabia, the best ally, the best friend of the US of all the Arab countries since 1945, without doubt, maybe you could say Jordan, but it's between those guys. I would say Saudi Arabia, just because they buy so much stuff. That's the consequence, right? We're going to kill Khamenei. And by the way, this big thing that now has to happen is that Saudi Arabia has to recognize Israel. It is all about Israel. It is not about American interests. It does make you think, how does the American taxpayer, how does the average American voter stand to benefit from Saudi Arabia signing the Abraham Accords with Israel? How does that help gas prices in Omaha? Let me know in the comments. Maybe you've got a great explanation. Paul and I are certainly confused. In an incredible coincidence, just as the US restarted its assault on Iran, Israel, of course, began a fresh wave of attacks in Lebanon. On Monday, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu vowed to intensify military attacks in Lebanon, saying they were aimed at crushing Hezbollah. There's a line we've heard several thousand times before. The Israeli military later confirmed it had struck 70 sites in Lebanon. In response, Hezbollah attacked a number of Israeli military posts in both southern Lebanon and northern Israel. Israel currently occupies a large swathe of Lebanese territory in the south of the country. That area is south of the so-called Yellow Line, marking an area from which hundreds of thousands of Lebanese have been forcibly displaced and to which they are not allowed to return. I should say, though, we said it's a sizable part of the country. Given the claim that Israel's inventory is the best in the world, it's tiny, especially when you compare it to someone like Iran. But it appears that those de facto territorial gains aren't enough. The Israeli military has today begun further ground operations north of that Yellow Line, and the timing here is significant. With an Iran war ceasefire deal thought to be almost complete, many now expect that it will bind Israel to a less offensive approach to Lebanon, with Iran making peace in the country conditional on a deal. Politically, it gives Netanyahu every single motive to scupper a deal ahead of parliamentary elections due to be held by the end of October. And opposition politicians are already accusing him of, quote, capitulation to Washington over Iran, with others fearful it signifies Israel's waning influence in the United States. Paul, we don't talk about Lebanon nearly enough. A significant, horrifying number of casualties in the last 4 months, really since February. Am I getting this wrong? Because to me, when I hear about how strong Israel's armed forces are, how powerful their infantry is, best infantry in the region, yet they can't go into Lebanon, they can't advance as far as the Litani River, not least because of Hezbollah.
Yeah.
In Iran, meanwhile, there's 90 million plus people. It's an advanced economy in some respects, its missile program, for instance. I feel like the public isn't really being told the scale of what Israel wants to do in Iran and how actually, when you look at Lebanon, they're not remotely close to being able to do it.
No, and I think it speaks again to like a fundamental misconception about the relative strength of Israel in the Middle East around these things, and actually how fundamentally reliant it is on the United States in every aspect of the way it actually conducts its warfare, which is precisely why they have sought to bring America into the war in Iran, because they know that it's not viable in any sort of meaningful way. I mean, Israel's a country of 10, 11 million people. The IDF has recruitment, but and people are conscripted, but it's a small standing army compared to Iran, for example. There's no possible way that Israel can actually displace the regime in Iran in a conventional war. That's never been on the cards. And it's always, in a sense, relied on and is sought to inveigle America's intervention in Iran, because that's really the only way you can actually defeat a population of 90 million people in a defensively secure mountain kingdom with a sophisticated defense technology base, which is, I think, surprised a lot of people how resilient it is, and also how resilient it is in the context of sort of post-90, how little the post-90 sanction regime actually works to disable sort of third power states. So it doesn't seem to me like there's any realistic option for Israel to actually win a conventional military war in Lebanon without American support. And it seems to me that their primary goal is to sort of move as far into the border as possible, secure a small buffer zone, and then basically hope that America will help them defend those gains. But it does feel like, I don't know if you agree, but it seems to me to be like an incredibly risky strategy, because it's precisely the sort of thing that if you watch America and you watch how it's playing out in America and you watch Tucker Carlson, this is precisely the sort of thing that's actually alienating Donald Trump's base. The sort of thing that they're trying to do to bring America closer into the conflict is the sort of thing that's actually driving a wedge between Donald Trump and MAGA base in the right in America.
Yeah, I just to remind people, Iran's population is 2/3 the size of Russia. It's 90 million people. It's a lot of people. And I remember seeing a post not that long ago saying that the UAE was a rising regional power and Iran is, its power has been overstated. The UAE, I think, has 1 million actual citizens and it's got 9 million guest workers. 1 million versus like 93 million. I mean, and like you say, it's a mountain kingdom, very defensible geographical borders. It has been invaded in the past, yes. You talk about Alexander the Great, blah, 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 blah. And Mahmud the Afghan and, the Ottomans and the Russians, but it's pretty defensible. 93 million people and 1 million people. It's a bit of a mismatch. But again, if you take all the talking points from legacy media in this country up until probably April, you probably believe that stuff. Well, Robert Kenyon is Reform UK's candidate in the Makerfield by-election due to be held next month. And while the party has been keen to pitch the self-employed plumber as the relatable, hard-working local choice, recently surfaced social media posts have created a battlefield. An account belonging to a user called Rob Kenyon1 appears to have been deleted last year, though its archive lives on. Last week, campaign group Hope Not Hate published some of those archive posts, with this one gaining by far the most attention. It begins with a Christmas Eve post from someone called Lewis, who replies to a post from Carol Vorderman by saying, "Happy birthday, Carol. My God, I'd love to smell and lick your arsehole." A second user called Chris then comments on that post saying that given Lewis is prepared to publish something so graphic on a public forum, he probably needs his computer checking. And Rob Kenyon1 then replies to the second user, saying of Lewis's post, quote, "He's only saying what we're all thinking, Chris. Speak for yourself." And he adds a laughing emoji and thumbs up. The surfacing of that post prompted this response from Vorderman.
Kenyon is a misogynist, in my opinion. And he's billed as this local plumber. No, he isn't. He's an online abuser. And I tell you what, if he was a local plumber in my area, I wouldn't let him through my front door.
I mean, that's quite reasonable, isn't it? If a guy's speaking like that to random women online, Paul, I mean, if you saw the local plumber say like that, talk like that, and you've got your partner or your wife, you've got your kids at home, you think, I don't want this guy in my house.
No, and it'll be so interesting to see actually how the story lands in a place like Makerfield, whether it actually appalls voters in the same way that, you watch this and you think this guy seems like pretty unpleasant. I mean, what seems to be the line that the Reform is going with now, which is interesting, is basically to say this stuff doesn't matter. Is to basically say this is just, locker room banter. And it'll be very interesting to see in a week whether this is still in the news cycle and whether that actually works or not.
We're talking about this story obviously now, and we're going to get to the heart of this. I've seen one comment here saying, I've said worse. And I presume if you stood for public office and wanted to be a member of parliament, you'd apologise. I presume you would. I mean, I think I've said some pretty bad things, not that bad. But if I said something that offensive, I think I probably would apologise. As Vorderman points out there, Hope Not Hate found a few other potentially dodgy tweets from the account. This was another from 2020. It comes at the end of a conversation that appears to be about when lockdown might end, with one user asking Rob Kenyon1, "Since when was he a politician?" To which Rob Kenyon1 replies, "If it's not tits and arse or rugby, it's politics." So he's always been a fan of politics, to be fair. That deleted Twitter account isn't the only source to have resurfaced that's been linked to the Makerfield by-election candidate. A user linked to the now deleted Twitter account also commented on an online rugby message board. This is from The Independent. The same account also wrote in 2011 that women can't, quote, ref, drive or give directions, and declared, "I'm sexist, sorry, but I am." 15 years ago, not 2020 to be fair. A post made on an online rugby fan forum in the 2010s objectified European women's bodies while saying English women don't care, just walk around with their fat bellies and odd shapes, pushing a pram at 16 in their PJs. Now, you know what? For me, this is the worst thing he said. This is the worst thing he said, because he's saying that British women are worse than European women. They're fat, they have too many kids. I thought Reform wanted to protect this country's women, not slag them off. Again, we're going to talk about the details of this, and I think personally people shouldn't be written out of politics because they say something dumb on social media 15 years ago. But again, I have a daughter, I've, God willing, touch wood, got another one on the way. I don't want him talking about women in this country like that, personally. Apologise, we move on. But they've chosen not to do that. Former Tory MP and now Reform UK defector Danny Kruger was asked about those posts on the Today programme.
it is clearly wrong for politicians to talk in that way. He was not a politician at the time. He was an ordinary man from an ordinary place. And what he's done now is to step forward, outraged at the state of our country and the state of his community.
Many ordinary men from ordinary places do not write like that.
I'm not going to defend those comments, but please can you acknowledge that there are other concerns at play here? Well, what reform stands for? It is an essential revolutionary movement.
You just talked about better politicians.
Absolutely, and we do.
And I've tried to use that as a theme to understand why, when you're going to get rid of some of the civil servants and you're going to replace them with potentially men in Makerfield who say they want to do that to TV presenters, whether they should, are they up to the job? Are they the best ordinary man from an ordinary background you could get?
What we want is politicians who will hold this machine to account. I'm not going to sit here and police the previous remarks, unacceptable as they may be, of people who, as private citizens, said things they shouldn't. There is a bigger story here, and I recognise I'm not going to diminish the importance of that, Emma, but if I may, the real challenge for our country is to get our economy moving, to secure our borders, to give opportunities to young people, and to rescue places like Makerfield from an economic model that isn't working.
In a statement, Reform UK also said this. These comments, which are a little more than locker room banter, he wasn't in a locker room, it was online for everybody to see, that's the point, it's a public statement, were made more than a decade ago, well before Rob was in politics. We simply don't care about establishment hit jobs. We fully back Rob and are confident he will be an excellent MP for Makerfield. Paul, I mean, on the one hand, there's some truth to that, that what somebody has written randomly 15 years ago, you know, that shouldn't write them out of politics in 2026, in my view. We can talk about that more. I think in a way, that response is more important to me from Reform than the contents of what he said. You know, again, he could apologise, he could say, I've learned, I'm sorry, we move on. I think most people, most voters, and that's what matters ultimately in Makerfield, would say, okay, might not vote for you anymore, but that's good enough. But Reform are doubling down.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I think on the first point, I think the one thing was, you know, this is not to defend his comments at all because they're clearly, they're plainly deplorable. But I think this is going to happen again and again and again in our politics, actually, because he's from a particular generation. He's basically our age, where for a lot of people, when they're on Twitter back in 2010 or 2011 and they got 3 followers, effectively they're treating it almost like a tiny social message board for their friends, sort of like what you treat like a WhatsApp group now, right? Which is not to defend those comments, just to say this is some context. So maybe, you know, it's quite different to him having 100,000 followers and putting it out there. And you'd expect in that sort of situation that, you know, people are slightly more like casual, actually more revealing about their views. You would expect him after that to apologize, right? I mean, the response from Reform, I think, is fascinating, both appalling and fascinating. And what they're sort of trying to test for the first time, I think, in a UK space is effectively sort of the Roy Cohn, Donald Trump approach, which is you never apologize for anything. You're always on their attack. Everybody else is wrong. Everybody else is taking themselves too seriously. Everybody, you know, just needs to lighten up, loosen their ties, behave like ordinary people. And they've obviously made some sort of internal decision that actually there are enough voters who, first of all, don't think this is actually a material issue. That they're not going to vote yes or no on the basis of these comments on enough scale to affect their vote. But maybe they're thinking, like, this happened with Donald Trump. You know, Donald Trump said horrific things. Donald Trump was caught on tape, the grab them by the pussy comments. Didn't make any difference to his success as a politician. In certain ways, some people saw that as a sign of authenticity. And you can see that's sort of what Reform is playing with at this point in time. They're sort of playing around this idea of, well, actually, this is what ordinary people talk like. We're not like you in Westminster. We don't follow these woke codes of conduct. You know, it's a bit loose when we have a drink around like the building site. It's sort of the implication they're giving. And that's both very worrying because actually you do want your political parties to uphold democratic norms. You do want them to push back against misogyny. You do want them to push back against homophobia. It's important that we said that our politicians set a tone because politicians who don't set a tone in that way invite other people to start pushing boundaries in other places, you know. If you see a politician, you know, in Reform who's saying horrifically misogynistic things or endorsing them, it's not unlikely you start hearing them on trains. You know, it makes public spaces more dangerous for people. But clearly they've decided at some level that people might actually buy into it. Either it'll fade away, either it'll just go away and it doesn't matter, or some people actually quite like it. and they'll lean into it. And then maybe this is actually some of the underlying subconscious, almost subliminal messaging the Reform wants to give across that it can't actually state explicitly. It's quite useful for them to say, we're not going to call this guy out. We're not going to be one of the tough guys who comes in and tells you to be politically correct. This is 15 years ago. Move on.
I mean, look, I see that argument, but equally, take the trans comment. A good question, I think, from the media would be to him, well, you've said those comments. Presumably you wouldn't say those as a member of parliament. I mean, that's one thing. You can ask that. But separately, let's say you're the MP for Makerfield and a trans constituent comes to you and says, I've been assaulted in the street. I've had my nose broken. Will you represent that person like you would any other constituent, right? We're talking about equality under the law. If their house is burgled, will you help them? Will you do casework for them, serving them as constituents, as voters, as taxpayers, as you would for anybody else? I mean, that's a really important question. Or do you think they're simply less important as human beings, right? I mean, by the sounds of it, he does think that. And then again, on the women comment, I think the media will emphasize the Carol Vorderman stuff because it's a great headline for them and it's going to get clicks. But he's basically saying that 50% of the population, again, he'll be representing a constituency of around 75,000 people. Half of those people are idiots. Again, you should probably apologize for that. It's worth contextualizing the post we've just discussed. The archived Rob Kenyon 1 account contains thousands of posts written between 2017 and 2025. And yes, there are some posts that are offensively misogynistic. There are also posts written during the height of COVID, which are anti-Chinese, and at least 2 that are overtly homophobic. But the vast majority of Rob Kenyon 1's Twitter activity involved his hardcore support for the Wigan Warriors Rugby League Football Club. When you look at Rob Kenyon 1's tweets in the round, it becomes clear that he went on a pretty radicalising journey. Along with the sexist posts on the rugby messaging board, Rob Kenyon 1 also discussed his politics. Here's one of those posts written in 2019. So anyone who thinks I love Trump, voted Brexit, read the Daily Mail, live in the 1950s, am a Tory and 103 years old, is wrong. I'm none of the above. In a later post, the account also wrote that they, quote, woke up the day after Brexit, shitting myself and to what was voted for. As in Rob, the plumber, was shitting himself. But they also said that the EU's treatment of Britain after the vote made them, quote, glad we voted out. In another post, the account said it would rejoin the EU tomorrow if the bloc was, quote, stripped back to what it was set up for. And the account also said this. Free movement of people is great when they're natives of EU countries and not people from outside Europe seeking a Greek passport that will allow them into any country in the EU. So you have there someone with concerns about the EU, with the generosity of freedom of movement inside the European Union, who nonetheless voted to remain in the EU. There's lots of people like that. He also distances himself from Donald Trump, Boris Johnson, the Daily Mail, not exactly your typical Reform UK profile, though Reform UK have now said that Kenyon did indeed vote leave in 2016. He himself said the opposite, but there we go. The party has also called Kenyon, quote, a proud Brexiteer, unlike Andy Burnham, who will drag the UK back into the EU by any means possible. But over on the deleted Twitter account, Rob Kenyon 1, also has some views you might not associate with reform. He was indeed supportive of, drumroll, industrial action, endorsing GMB's British gas strike. Go on, Rob. Rob Kenyon 1 also worked for the NHS during COVID, and he regularly vented his frustration at those who doubted the reality of the virus. Sounds pretty woke to me. He also spent significant time trying to discredit COVID misinformation, while calling on people to pay attention to the advice of the Chief Medical Officer, Chris Whitty. Makes you think. But something appears to change during the latter part of the COVID pandemic. By late 2022, Rob Kenyon 1 is reposting COVID conspiracy theories and supporting Liz Truss of all people. And he's taken to telling the Chief Medical Officer to F right off. Paul, I mean, in a way, actually, this is much more interesting than the idea that he's been a horrendous, horrible individual for 20 years. He's far right. I mean, the evidence would indicate the opposite. Pretty normal dude, probably right of centre, seems to have voted for Remain. He said as much, has some socially conservative views, but supports the NHS, supports striking gas workers. Maybe his mate was one of them. I mean, that's quite a, a normal, albeit contradictory set of things. And he's been on a journey where he says some really strange stuff and now he's standing for reform. I mean, that is a way more interesting story, isn't it, than identikit far-right guy for 20 years, hasn't changed a bit.
Yeah, I mean, it's also interesting to see. I mean, it is this quite odd thing of trying to basically watch the development of a political personality and like a whole person through their social media posts, right?
True.
Which is actually, first of all, that's not entirely going to be a reflection of everything. There's going to be, a degree of self-curation around that. What is quite striking, and I've gone through some of the media reporting, I haven't gone through his archive, but how much more political his posts have come over time. And that feels like actually quite an organic change, there has been an underlying change in like algorithmically driven content on social media, right? I'm not saying that social media like determines all our social consciousness at all, but there does seem to be, certainly around the COVID period, a lot of additional political content that will serve to people, that actually politicize people on both sides of the political spectrum, but generally speaking, became quite a useful feeder scheme. People started feeling upset about COVID, didn't think it was fair, didn't think it was just, didn't think that, the way the lockdown was applied evenly or effectively across society. There were people ready to take that stuff and lead them into sort of more politicized spaces. And to me, it feels like that's part of a broader underlying change in the way the social media feeds us stuff, which did change. They did change the algorithm, right, in sort of the late 2010s, because it used to be, it's all driven by engagement, right? And they realized that actually the thing that drives engagement the most is people being angry, people being upset, people feeling like they've been hard done by. They also serve up more political content because it's much easier to produce. People have more robust opinions. People engage more about that stuff than they would about, necessarily, photos of their latest barbecue. So it's interesting to see, we both on the one hand watching through this lens of social media, we're trying to pass his political, psychological development. At the same time, we're also using that as a prism to refract how social media has changed itself and how it's changing our politicians and how it's actually generating this sort of quite bizarre political feedback loop that suddenly generates a character like Rob the plumber, who has been taken from a relatively ordinary guy who likes rugby into being a political player who could potentially have like a major impact on like the political life of this country. Because this by-election really could be quite sort of definitional in terms of how the Labour Party does in the future. Suddenly you have this character who was apolitical, it seems, just posting about Carol Vorderman and, other things.
And the Wigan Warriors.
And Wigan Warriors is now posting about COVID and politics and has been drawn into this stuff. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but it's an interesting thing.
Yeah. And you said it's not just on one side, and that's absolutely true, right? Because on one side, which we talked about today, you've got Rob the plumber. On the other side, you've got Hannah the plumber. Millions of people are taking politics more seriously than ever. It might be because of COVID. It might be because of Gaza, cost of living, Russia, Ukraine. But it really is, I think, beyond any doubt that the general public is more politicized than at any point in my lifetime.
I think that's true. I think it's really interesting. And maybe I can act as a bit of a case study for you. So, I'm originally from South Africa. In South Africa, politics is like the national sport. It's the national gossip. Everybody's talking about politics. Like we have endless commissions of inquiry or court cases and everyone's following them. Literally during lockdown, the number one thing that people were watching in South Africa was a judicial commission of inquiry that was streaming live. And when I came to the UK, I was quite shocked by how hard it was to engage people in political conversations, that actually it became like a bit of a social impediment. As a young guy living in Hackney, trying to make friends with people. And I tried to talk about politics and people just didn't want to engage at all.
When was this?
2008, 2009. And it was very hard to get people to engage. I remember, join the Labour Party. Even in that period, it felt quite hard to engage people. I mean, around about the AV vote referendum, like trying to talk about people about like proportional representation versus AV vote. Nobody was talking to me at my age about that. Now it feels very different. Now it feels like actually politics is a national conversation that is had like very broadly and very widely. And it's particularly pronounced amongst young people. It is striking to me the extent to which young people in the UK are so much more politicized than they were. And maybe it's just like, we had this last privileged generation where maybe you didn't need to worry about politics because the world wasn't burning. There wasn't Gaza. We were living at the tail end of like the privilege of the 90s peace dividend, right? But it's definitely very different. And it's definitely made our politics, I feel, both more engaging and interesting, but feels a lot more high stakes at this point. of course, because the background to all of this stuff, right, is like massively increased inequality, climate change, which you're going to be talking about. These are like the underpinning social realities driving this engagement, which is all being refracted through social media. And maybe it's possible that 10, 15 years ago, Novara media couldn't have succeeded in that sort of environment.
100%. Right? You know, if you look at, you said you were in Hackney in 2008-9, think about all the hipsters going around on their single-speed bikes, having their, you know, lovely coffee. That worldview, that way of relating to the world is only possible if you might be able to get some housing security. And of course, that was ebbing away at that point, but it wasn't quite as bad as it is now. You might be able to get some housing security. Cost of living isn't terrible. You know, you can just about make ends meet. You haven't got runaway inflation. And these are all things that really, you get them after the Global financial crisis, then you get them with COVID, you get them with the, you know, Russia-Ukraine war. It's coming again now down the line with Iran. These were luxury beliefs. There's that line the right likes to use. A subplot in the Makerfield by-election saga is the story of Restore. The party presently has one MP, its founder Rupert Lowe, and it's generally considered a meme party more than anything else. But as experience tells us, woe betide anyone who ignores memes or underestimates their ability to make the political weather. Because while for now, Reform just have one guy in Westminster as well as 21 councillors, they've had polling that puts them on 8 and even 9% nationally. They also have tens of thousands of members, and Rupert Lowe's Facebook account has 1.2 million followers. Here we go again, I hear you say. None of that's real, Aaron. Facebook isn't real. Large memberships just don't matter that much. Look at Corbyn's Labour. Except in a narrow by-election, they sort of do. In recent days, new polling by Survation gives Burnham the lead in Makerfield. Just. Survation has Labour on 43%, with Reform, just behind on 40%. Here's the big news, though. The Restore are on 7%, which means a strong showing by Rupert Lowe's party could give Burnham the seat and, incredibly, pave his way to number 10. Wow. And I mean, wow. These are fascinating subplots, right? Rob the plumber gets radicalised. Does Andy Burnham become the next Prime Minister? Rupert Lowe starts a new political party. Will the Labour Party die? These things are operating with very fine margins right now. All of this has been followed by Dan Hodges, who, after visiting the seat last week, wrote in Sunday's Mail on Sunday that the Restore vote was very real. In that piece, Hodges talks about how Reform, had Burnham not been Labour's candidate, would have done very well. You know, he thinks that Reform would have won this by-election at a canter. Even then, it's close, of course, but the Restore vote could really, really make the difference. So Reform should win this seat. Burnham comes in, it's really close. That's his assessment. That's what Survation is saying. But he's saying, you know what? The Restore thing is not just a polling error. I've seen it. And I've had multiple people tell me this personally as well. Restore, if you go into the middle of the constituency, you see a ton of garden stakes, you see a ton of posters. It's real. Doesn't mean they're going to win. Doesn't mean they're going to come second. But they're, you know, they're in the realms of keeping their deposit. In response, Reform have freaked out, basically, which might indicate that Lowe has indeed thrown something of a spanner in the works. After that poll was published, Reform posted this on X. Vote Restore, get Burnham. Lowe has criticised Robert Kenyon, the Reform candidate, for his previous comments on Brexit and Trump. And in response, Kenyon posted this. I used to respect you, Rupert. Restore have never wanted anything to do with this area, but now someone born with a silver spoon in their mouth is trying to lie about the only working class local man in the race. I want net negative immigration. I mean, that's a really stupid thing to do, isn't it? Start a flame war with a guy who has 1.2 million followers on Facebook. Maybe he knows more than I do when it comes to this stuff. Then there's Richard Tice, who shared an article in Spiked magazine, which attacked Restore and Mr. Lowe. Superb by Brendan O'Neill. Must read. These guys want to form a government, and they're citing Spiked magazine as kind of an attack dog that's going to win them this seat. I mean, it's panic stations, folks. Finally, there's Matt Goodwin, Reform's candidate in Gorton Denton, who said this. It is crystal clear Restore have no idea what they're doing. They are amateurs who are only helping the left. Only Reform has a serious plan for saving this country, including reversing the Boris wave. I urge you all to get behind it. Vote Reform. What's so funny is that Matt Goodwin and the people in Reform and the people in Restore all backed Boris Johnson in 2019. And now they're fighting over who can reverse the Boris wave. You voted for it. What are they going to be arguing about next? We'll get a Reform government. We need to reverse the Farage wave. We had no idea this would happen. Well, we were told Brexit would reduce immigration. It went up. We were told that Boris Johnson getting a supermajority would bring back the glory years. And now we're being told Farage can sort it all out. When is it going to click that maybe these guys don't have the monopoly, in any case, on good ideas? And now, why is this fury happening? And is that polling real? According to Lowe, it actually understates Restore's real numbers. Here's what the man himself said on Twitter. They're getting the same returns as us on the doorstep. That's in reference to Reform. So, canvassing returns, according to Rupert Lowe, which I don't personally believe, it's his experience. I don't doubt it's his experience. I just think it's representative of broader reality. The canvassing returns for Reform and Restore are the same. I thought this tweet, again by Dan Hodges, was a good one. Reform's increasingly frenzied attacks on Restore represents the biggest example of the Streisand effect in British political history. I mean, that's probably a little bit OTT. In years to come, PPE students at Oxford will be reading textbooks about all of this. Do you think Restore could be the thing that sends Andy Burnham to 10 Downing Street?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't think so. My sense is that this is an incredibly interesting insurgent campaign that is basically extracting concessions from the right out of Reform, and that the vote will generally consolidate. My sense is that it's such fine knife-edge stuff, right? It really is like very small margins. My sense is that, polling people ahead of an election, when the opportunity is to bring in Reform MP, which would fundamentally transform the Labour Party. You absolutely, would throw it into crisis, would almost guarantee, you'd think it would certainly create the conditions where you could have a Reform government very realistically in the next 2.5 years. I think that vote will consolidate. What is interesting to me is the extent to which Rupert Lowe is being Nigel Farage's Nigel Farage. Because this has been Nigel Farage's trick his whole political life. He's actually been, I would argue, probably the most successful political operator in the UK achieving his political objectives by doing what Rupert Lowe is doing now, which is planting himself to the right of the Tories and basically saying, unless you give me what I want, unless you do exactly what, unless you pull your policy platform to my direction, I will make sure you don't win the seat. And he's always been, one thing that's been interesting about Farage is he's always, until 2019, when they all got behind Boris Johnson as part of the agreed deal, was that he always stuck with it. He said, no, I'm not going to pull out. He's not doing what the Greens have done, for example, in Makerfield, where they sort of half discussing whether or not to run. He said, no, I will always run. If you don't win my voters, that's your fault, not mine. I'm going to pull you along with me. And he's been incredibly successful. So the question now becomes, it's such a weird situation as well, where Reform, who don't have the seat, are actually sort of the establishment party in this fight of the far right, which is very unusual. Because I think the one thing that's really striking about that poll, I think you spoke about it online, is the Conservatives are 2%. I mean, that is extraordinary. I think people undervalue and under-explore the extent to which the 2024 general election was not about Labour winning everything, but actually about the Tory party, a party of government for 100, 200 years, falling to pieces. So my sense is that they will come to some sort of agreement, the end result of which is I think the Reform is going to move even further to the right. I mean, we've even started seeing, so if you saw the stuff that Robert Jenrick and Zia Youssef were sort of sparring about whether, the extent to which they want to engage in remigration or outward migration from the country. It's working from Rupert Lowe's perspective. But I don't think it's going to be the thing that actually changes the vote. The thing that changes the vote is the extent to which Andy Burnham can get the vote out.
We've not had a race like this in terms of a by-election where you've got two candidates on the right. I think it might bugger them. I really do. Because if you're Reform, you want to get as many postal votes in the bag, for instance, 2-3 weeks before polling day, 3 weeks before polling day. That's what you want. And you're going to have people saying, you know what, I'm not sure. There's a lot more don't knows than there otherwise would have been. And I think that's really going to hurt them. And it's hard. They're being powered by enthusiasm. Not by everybody, because not everybody's enthusiastic about Reform, but their side are meant to be enthusiastic about them. And Restore's pinched some of that. And he's now being attacked, Rob Kenyon, from two sides. It's fascinating. It is really fascinating. And I think your point about the Tories being the real story here in some ways, just 2%, Restore allegedly, according to Salvation, 7%. So Restore allegedly. The state is only 350 people, but they are in the constituency. Restore having more than 3 times the vote of the Tory party. Isn't it crazy? We always hear from legacy media, Kemi Badenoch's doing so well. They just love to confect these kind of alternate realities, don't they? She's doing so well. I'm looking at the local elections. I'm looking at the Makerfield polling. I'm looking at Galston and Denton. They didn't come in the top 3 there. They're losing all their donors to Reform. I mean, Labour, and this is really key, this is the most important by-election, I think, since, 1922, since Newport, which killed the Liberals, basically. It was the end of the Liberal Party. And you're right, that if Burnham doesn't win this, the calculation then becomes that Labour are probably going to get single or double-digit MPs. I think double digits is really, I think 100 MPs at that point would be really impressive, right? If they lose Makerfield, with Andy Burnham running. That's part of it. And then I think you probably would see some defections, actually. I think people would start to say, well, my seat's gone. Oh, bugger it. I might as well just join the Greens or join Reform.
I feel like there's been this degree of complacency amongst Labour circles. There's an assumption that certainly amongst the soft left, that Andy Burnham will return and his unique political instincts and his brand will carry Labour enough that you can begin this process of like a mid-government recovery. Yeah. What's undervalued, I think, is the extent to which Burnham losing will send this government into like total crisis. Because at that point, what do you actually have? You have an incumbent prime minister who pretty much everybody can't stand. And I think if there's one message that came out of the local elections, it was pretty much we're done with this political project. We're sending you a message, this guy has to go. And that was, even though it was a local election, that was a very consistent theme that Keir Starmer himself was driving defections away from the Labour Party in both directions, right, to Reform and to the Greens. So then you're going to have a prime minister. You're going to have had this 6, 8, 10-week psychodrama. We've had a by-election. This guy's arrived. At the end point of which is this guy who we've all basically said we don't want as prime minister is still there clinging to power. And who's in the cupboard to challenge him? I mean, it's Angela Rayner. Could she get enough votes? Is she going to be popular with the public? I have no idea. Or it's going to be Wes Streeting. Is Wes Streeting going to make a move? I mean, at that point, the Labour Party is in like a very dire situation.
Here's the thing that people aren't saying, and you're right, it's terrible for Starmer either way. Burnham wins, he's gone. Burnham loses, I mean, the party collapses. But if Burnham loses in Makerfield, Labour's most popular politician, bar none, if he loses in Makerfield, then any smart money would say that Wes Streeting, Angela Rayner, Ed Miliband, Keir Starmer, all their seats are gone. These are not safe seats. I mean, Streeting's majority, I think, is about 650. Really, really extraordinary. Stay with Novara for all of that. I'll be going up to Makerfield in the next couple of weeks to make a little documentary. And of course, we'll be covering the by-election on the night. That doesn't come for free, sadly. If you want coverage that isn't failing Labour lords who were part-time comedians going on Sky News and talking nonsense for hours on end on the night of the by-election, why not support our work here at Novara Media? You get more wise words from people like Paul, Ash Sarkar, Michael Walker, and dare I say myself, but also we get to cover this stuff in a very different way to what you see in legacy media. If you think that's a good idea, go to support.novaramedia.com, I think, or novara.media/support. I should know that by now, shouldn't I? The link is also in the description below. You might have noticed from the sweat dripping down my forehead, we're yet to master air conditioning here at Novara Towers, but it's rather hot. Yesterday saw a new record for temperatures in Britain for this time of year, with the mercury in Kew Gardens, Richmond, hitting 34.8 degrees C. That's a whole 2 degrees higher than the previous record set 82 years ago. But of course, this is 2026, and everyone has gone mad. So the fact that the previous record was in the 1940s was naturally taken by some to be evidence that actually climate change isn't real. So wait, the weather was the exact same temperature as 82 years ago, but I thought every summer was, quote, the hottest ever because of climate change. Well, no, because 34.8 degrees is 2 degrees warmer than 32.8, which is the previous number. It's a new record. The number's gone up. That's the point. 34 was higher than 32. That account was far from alone in making such a astute observation, though. This is from Dr. Zoe Harcombe, PhD, although I wonder what the PhD is in. We all know, of course, Gillian McKeith, the famous nutritionist. Dr. Gillian McKeith. Today was the hottest May day in the UK since 1944. So if today's temperature is due to global warming, what was the deal in 1944? Again, just to be clear, it's 2 degrees warmer than it was then. This is yesterday. Of course, today might even be higher still. I want to be clear about this. Hot weather existed before man-made climate change. Freak weather events, floods, drought, all of that existed before the high levels of CO2 in the atmosphere led to a rise in temperatures. Okay? You can read about it in the Bible. Nobody's saying it started with the Industrial Age. Nobody's saying that. What has changed, though, is that these events are becoming more common and the planet is generally getting warmer. We know this by looking at average temperatures and wider measures. We look at trends. For instance, there are the 10 hottest days on record in Britain, all of which were in England. As you can see, 9 of the 10 hottest days on record are since 1990. 6 of the 10 are since 2000, and 3 of the 5 warmest days on record are all since 2020. You've got a date there from 100 years ago, but that's besides the point. The majority of the data shows what's happening. It's getting warmer. Last year, meanwhile, was the warmest and sunniest on record. That was true for the whole of the UK, but also England, with the average temperature for the latter across the whole year, across the whole of 2025, reaching almost 11 degrees. So not just warmer summers, but more clement winters, less cold winters, less snow. That means the 3 warmest years since 1884 are 2022, 2023, and 2025. The 3 warmest years on record. 2022, 2023, 2025. Do you spot a pattern there? I can't quite put my finger on it. But that wasn't enough for the GOAT of conspiracy theories, the greatest of all time, David Icke. Here he is responding to Zach Polanski. What's the word I'm looking for? Oh yes, got it. Bollocks. Climate change, it's all bollocks. However, David Icke saying climate change isn't real, that's not news. What caught my eye was this reply. In Australia, the temps reach 45 degrees plus, and we're just fine. So we're starting to go beyond climate change denial, and of course we have to because it is getting warmer. It's 35 degrees in the spring, and people are just saying, actually, what's the problem if Britain suddenly has a climate like Australia? A reminder, 18% of Australia is literally desert. 70% of the country is arid or semi-arid. It can't be lived on basically by humans. You only get large-scale human settlement on the coasts. If Britain had anything like the heat of Australia, which thank goodness isn't happening anytime soon, its existing biosystems would collapse. But these people know this, right? Surely they know this. And how could we talk about a British heatwave without mentioning 1976? It was hot back then, didn't you know? So climate change can't be real. Take this tweet as evidence of that argument. This is from No Farmers, No Food. The 1976 UK heatwave was one of the most intense, prolonged periods of high temperatures in British history, lasting from 23rd of June to 27th of August, 1976. But no one blamed cow farts, and the weather map certainly didn't look like a volcano had erupted over Britain. Interesting. Now let's see the whole planet comparing 1976 and 2022. That makes sense. So in 1976, yes, Britain was indeed very, very hot. Statistically much warmer than you would expect it to be, and much of the planet is less so. It's blue. Fast forward to June 2022, it looks quite different. There's lots of orange. What's changed? I can't quite put my finger on it. It just goes to show that one data point in one country in 1 year doesn't tell you the whole story of the reality of climate change. Paul, why are people still so insistent that 2 consecutive days of 35 degrees C in spring isn't a big deal?
I mean, there's 2 things, right? I mean, first of all, I think the phrase climate denial is interesting because, we treat it, the way it's treated in social sciences, climate denial just means denying that the climate is changing. But I think it's obviously a deeper fundamental psychological response to the enormity of climate change, which if you actually start reading about it is genuinely quite terrifying, quite scary, that we are we really are on the cusp of like pretty fundamental changes in our ability to function as a society, and that is scary if somebody isn't presenting you with a plan and there's no public discussion about a plan about how we're going to deal with that. So in the absence of sort of political leaders actually establishing that, it's looking pretty bad, but this is the way that we can moderate, this is the way we can move forward. In that vacuum, people respond with denial because it's too terrifying to acknowledge it otherwise. I think it's interesting to me as well is that I was reading the study that came out last year. It was an academic study that happened in the States, which was assessing across the world, the US, so all different countries in Africa and in Asia as well. It's a pretty, substantive study. And what they were looking at is how many people were concerned about climate change and how many people thought other people were concerned about climate change. And actually the figures are pretty astonishing that actually at the top level, almost everybody in those countries, you get places like Denmark, 90% of people care about climate change. In China, it was something like 99% of people care about climate change. Even in the US, where it was pretty low, it's still sort of in the 80s. But every single person who responded thought that less people cared about climate change than other people. And that's just the effect of those sort of posts, right? Is to create the sense that actually what is quite an outlier opinion is more commonly held, and that actually if you express an opinion that is with climate science, you're going to get like some sort of bollocking. But it is mad, it is crazy, because we are, and it is crazy to me that we're in a situation where I feel like our entire political discourse is utterly unable to factor in the changes that are 5 or 10 years in the future in terms of the effect on food prices, the effect on food security in the UK. It's going to be really profound. And we're having a discussion in this Makerfield by-election, about bond markets, which is effectively an incredibly short-termist way of understanding the economic cycle, when we should be talking about what is a politician going to do in 5 or 10 years to stop the fact, to mitigate the fact that some food prices are going to go up 40% in 2035. I was just actually out in Essex this weekend speaking to a bunch of farmers, and they're saying to me, this is scary for us at this point in time. This is actually one of the most difficult crop years we've had. If we don't get rain in the next 1 or 2 weeks, half of our crop doesn't grow, right? One of the effects of climate change in the UK is that it's going to make the UK wetter winter, which makes our soil waterlogged, which also means, which is so weird when you watch that person you posted from some social media and it's a tractor and it's his username.
Yeah,
no farm, no food.
I don't think that's real.
Right.
I can't
believe that's real.
Every single farmer I've spoken to, I don't speak to lots of farmers, but I speak to a fair few, or people that work in food production, every single one says it's getting warmer. They might have a range of views about what to do about it, but nobody says climate change isn't real. I mean, Christ, we're growing Pinot Noir in the New Forest. Right?
And farmers aren't served by being in denial. Farmers' bread and butter is what they can grow, what they can't grow, what's going to be successful. It's not helpful to them to ignore the things that are happening in front of them. So actually, you're not going to get that as a widespread view. What you are going to get is people saying, how are we going to mitigate this? How are we going to deal with this? And currently, I think we've lost that political momentum about discussing, well, we are sort of edging towards 1.5 degrees Celsius. How do we mitigate that? How do we actually give people a degree of hope and a sense of moving towards some sort of action? How do we, help people as they struggle through this? Because in the absence of that, this is what you're going to get. You're going to get denial and fatalism, right? And apathy.
Yeah. There's a strange illusion. So, you do meet farmers who say climate change is real, but people shouldn't eat less meat. I mean, it's a tiny part of the problem. Or there was a story a few years ago, right? Ireland needs to produce fewer cows to meet its CO2 targets, and farmers are going doolally. I agree with that, right? I agree with that. That is not the problem. The problem with climate change is about our energy systems fundamentally. Production of concrete and cement is about 9% of CO2 emissions. Glass and steel, is the same. Aviation is just 3%. The focus on personal travel and what we eating's a lot, but also it's also really hard to change, right? Decarbonising things like transport, decarbonising steel, concrete, these are huge things which we're making good progress on, just not nearly quickly enough. And I think what you're saying about the scale of the problem worrying people, I think is really true. And I think it's why you slip from one to the other, which is, oh, well, no, climate change isn't real. And then you give the details and you say, well, no, because of atmospheric concentrations of CO2, the planet's about 1.3 degrees warmer than 1800, blah, blah, blah. Okay, well, you know what? It's not so bad. We get a bit more nice weather here in Britain. Here's the thing with climate change, it's kind of a coin toss between, do we get Southern European temperatures like this or do we lose the Gulf Stream? does this country get to minus 25 degrees C? The FT did a great article about this, by the way. It's possible. There are really clever people saying it's quite possible. Not probable, but possible. I would like to minimize the risk of that, personally. Imagine your great-grandchildren, or not even your great-grandchildren, your grandchildren, in 100 years, living in Britain, and the climate is like northern Finland. They might be quite pissed off with you if you didn't do anything to stop it happening. Paul, what can people do? Because apparently, like you say, most people do care about this stuff. People like Zach Polanski make the political weather. Labour won some votes. They came first. They didn't ignore the issue. Politicians at least have to make some concessions. Farage's video where he announced he was going to run was, of course, in the great English countryside. He was in Kent with his dogs. He knows what he's doing. So there is wide acknowledgement about these things mattering to people. Where is the Green movement failing? We can talk about the nasty right and the climate deniers, but where is the Green movement failing?
That's like the $1 million question, right? And I'm not sure that I have the straightforward, simplest answer to that. I mean, it seems to me that actually, generally speaking, almost all political actors have ceded this ground. So you use the Labour Party as a good example. One of my favorite pieces of Labour Party law of the last 2 or 3 years is the day that Rachel Reeves announced that they were not going to do the £28 billion a year Green New Deal was the same day it was announced by I think it was the UN Meteorological Society, that the Earth had just gone to its 365 hottest days ever recorded, right? And in that moment, it was about achieving a short-term political goal. They didn't think it would play well. They'd done some polling with some voters. They were worried about Tory attack lines, so they gave it up. And effectively, they tied their hands for the majority of this government, where the amount of work they're actually doing on climate change, considering the scale of it, is pretty minimal compared to what it needs to be. I mean, it seems to me that there is a space, younger people in particular, if you look at the polling, are terrified of climate change and are waiting for somebody to mobilize. The thing that was interesting about that academic study I was telling you about is what it showed us is there's actually the possibility, there's a real latent possibility for a global climate movement, but you have to actually find a way to communicate to people that other people want to do it as well, and that if we exert concerted joint political power, we can actually change something like that, which is something that capitalism almost always tells us we can't do, and always makes us feel like we're more alienated, always makes us feel like we're more diffuse people, or more selfish people, than human nature can't be relied upon to act cooperatively. So, part of it's messaging, part of it's we just need some socialism, I think.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I think, people talk about watermelons. They're greens on the outside, they're socialists on the inside. And of course, that's nonsense on the one hand, but equally, I think ecological commitments, which are real, lead to at least quasi-socialist conclusions, right? I think when you've got to think in a way about being a good ancestor, about, planting the trees so that your grandchildren can sit in their shade, you have to think about something bigger than yourself. And of course, that's completely at odds with the worldview that we've been inculcated with really since the Industrial Revolution, but particularly since the Thatcher Revolution in the 1970s. We've actually got some breaking news on this. The temperature reached a shocking 35.1 degrees C in London today, in Kew Gardens again. So you've had the hottest May day, the temperature, the hottest on record, 2 days in a row. So before this week, the hottest day in May on record was 32.8 degrees. Monday, 34.8 degrees. Today, 35.1 degrees C. Now, I know the Daily Mail and Good Morning Britain and Talk TV are all going to say, well, it's just the summer. Suck it up. Enjoy it while it lasts. It's not the summer. It's the spring. The summer doesn't start until June the 21st for another 3 weeks. We've had the record temperature for May broken 2 days in a row. Thanks for joining me tonight.
Thanks for having me. It was very fun.
It was very fun, albeit very hot. We have got the aircon here. Like I said, it's rather noisy. If you want to be a little bit quieter in the future, you know what to do. Hit the support button in the description below. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in tonight. Come back tomorrow for another live stream from 6 p.m. For now, you've been watching Novara Media. Good night.